Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leisrealtalk. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. All right, it's Tuesday. Well, another week just began. Okay. Last week, someone asked me about the second wave of COVID. I believe it was last Tuesday. I said I have heard about it and I have not looked into it. Guess what? I did look into it, and I think it's a topic that worth a session. And so today we'll actually not only talk about the public health situation in China, we'll also answer another very important question. How much debt does the CCP have? Uh, so those of you who are not interested in the COVID situation in China, you should stay till the second half that when I talk about the debt, because that's, when I looked into the second wave of COVID, that prompted me to look into how much debt does the CCP have, and that's very interesting. So, so Chinese people are talking about getting COVID again, and medical experts are warning about another wave in China. So the question is, will Beijing lock down again? That's the question that we'll discuss tonight. I don't think it will lock down because it does not have the money to do so. The Chinese government has grown its debt by 60% in the last 3 years, and so it doesn't have any capacity to borrow any more money. So tonight we'll answer 4 questions. First is there another wave of COVID in China? And secondly, will the government lock down again? And then how bad is the Chinese government's debt problem? And then how much did zero COVID cost them? So all right, so let's get to the first question. Is there another wave of COVID in China? So 2 days ago, on April 23rd, yeah, that's only 2 days ago. It feels like here we go. Yeah. So the hashtag is the second COVID infection worse than the first one, topped the hot search list on Chinese Twitter with over 210 million views and 6,100 discussions. And the next day, the topic COVID also topped the search list. So people want to know whether the next wave is coming because netizens in many parts of China are saying that they got COVID for the second time, or some even say they got it for the third time, and they have posted their positive test results online. So here we have like different posts. People are talking about how they got it for the second time, or the husband got it for the second time, and they posted the pictures of their tests. Someone even reviewed that hospitals are starting to ask medical professionals who treat fever patients to take extra protection by wearing N95 masks and also wear protective protective suits, and what do you call that? Facial gargles? The shield, the facial shield. Yeah. Now, on Saturday, we talked about the BMW's mini ice cream incident. Remember, we had a lot of fun talking about ice cream and CCP politics. And at the 20th Shanghai International Auto Show, it's being held from April the 18th to the 27th, so it's still ongoing. Now, the ice cream incident went viral, but it isn't the only news about the auto show that got viral. So people from different parts of China, as far as Guangdong, who attended the Shanghai Auto Show, are discussing that they got COVID from the show. So you have, so here you have a woman said that her boyfriend went to Shanghai and attended the auto show and started to have high fever on the 20th, and she started to have cough. So then they discovered they tested positive. And this person said, as soon as they came back from the Shanghai Auto Show, they got COVID. And this person even said that at least like the number of people he knew who got COVID from the auto show was more than 10. So he said, everyone need to take precaution. Yeah. So this person know 10 people who got COVID from the auto show. And then you have this person from Guangdong who showed a medical test report showing that he or she got COVID. So before I get to that, so in response, the Shanghai healthcare, I have a model who worked at the auto show reported that she was infected, but her manager hid it from the client and asked the model to continue to go to work, or she would not be paid. So you have these COVID positive patients who are tested positive who continue to work at the show. So that just shows you. I think people do that for economic reasons. It's not because they want to infect other people. I think it's just earning money is so difficult now, and then her manager probably does not want to lose the revenue. But anyways, in response, the Shanghai Healthcare Commission said that China has lifted the tight COVID control measures since January 8th. And so it basically said that we're not in we're in a different state. COVID is not as threatening as it was in last year. So the Health Commission asked people to contact the auto show directly if they have any concerns. And then the venue of the auto show said that they follow the direction from the municipal government, and then that they should contact the municipal government. So the two, they're just pointing, fingers at each other. It's worth noting that people in other parts of China, like Shanxi, Henan, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Sichuan, all have recently experienced symptoms such as coughing and fever and suspect that they have COVID. They all originally believed that it was influenza A, as remember in January, China was pushing for influenza A publicity and discouraged doctors to test people for COVID. So these people believe that they got influenza A, but then later they found out they had COVID. So the above news has aroused public concern over a COVID resurgence because May Labor Day is right around the corner. It's a 5-day break from April 29th to May 3rd, and people will be traveling extensively. So public places like train stations or airports may be more crowded than the Shanghai Auto Show. So the sudden outbreak, and then the sudden outbreak from 5 months ago, is still fresh on people's mind, right? So people are seriously concerned. And what confirmed people's suspicion that a second wave is on the horizon, or is already hitting, is the speech given by a leading expert. So here you have, I found this on a municipal government website, who had a headline saying Dr. Zhang Wenhong is saying that we should get ready, we should prepare ourselves for the second wave of COVID. So that tells us that it is definitely, even though the mainstream media, the Chinese mainstream media is not talking about it, but here and there you do hear experts warning people. So on April 20th, Dr. Zhang Wenhong, the director of National Center for Infectious Diseases in Shanghai, and the chief of infection department at the Huashan Hospital, which is the hospital affiliated with Fudan University, gave a speech at the Infection and Immunity Summit of 2023. And the title of his speech is The Second COVID Infections. So he said, according to data, if the virus mutates, second infections will slowly appear after 6 months, meaning 6 months after the first wave. So if December, depending on how you determine the first wave, it's December, right? So 6 months would be June. He said that the second infection will slowly appear after 6 months, but usually on a small scale. But if the virus mutation effectively breaks through the immune barrier formed by the body to fight the previous wave of virus, then the second wave will peak again. He suggests that people should have drugs, OTC drugs, prepared so as to respond quickly to the arrival of another mutant strain. He also suggested people taking another shot of the vaccines. So Dr. Zhang is generally a popular doctor who the people respect, unlike some other experts that people don't have a lot of respect for. His opinion is generally well received by people because he does not go along with the official narratives. However, after having gone through the dramatic zero COVID and then the dramatic closure of zero COVID and the high fatality rate and the lack of OTC drugs, everything that after people have gone through everything in the past 3 years, people become very suspicious of any so-called expert telling them anything. So people have become very skeptical about his suggestion as well, and people are saying, people leaving comments like, we have awakened to the government's or to the officials' lack of accountability on COVID. So with that's everything that I have seen. I think it looks like a second wave is on the horizon. We just do not know how vicious or how serious it is. It will be. And so the question is, in the event it gets vicious, will Beijing lock down again? Right? That's the next question we have for ourselves. I do not think so. Why do I say that? Well, today, just as people start to be concerned about the second wave, and just as people are getting ready for the May Labor Day long weekend or long weekend, because it's a 5-day weekend, China's foreign ministry said that all inbound travelers now only need to show COVID antigen test results taken within 48 hours before boarding the flight, starting April 29th. That's the day. That's the day of the May Labor Day break, right? Perfect timing, isn't it? So China has dropped the PCR test requirement. So antigen tests are the rapid tests. They're cheaper and faster. So I think this announcement indicates, that Beijing is unlikely to lock down China again. And my reason for saying that is China cannot afford to lock down again because of its financial difficulties. So that brings us to the second topic, which is to talk about China's debt, or the CCP's debt problem. So in the past 3 years, zero COVID has cost Beijing dearly. We just have never been able to put a dollar amount, or not a dollar amount, a yuan amount, a renminbi amount on it. But let's try to quantify that tonight. So the biggest impact is the amount of debt that has kept piling up in the past 3 years. Let's take a look at how much debt the CCP has accumulated, right, during the pandemic. So let me share this slides. Let me make this bigger. Let me make myself disappear. All right. So the first question is, how big is CCP's budget deficit, right? Before we talk about the debt. So this is based on CCP's official number. Okay, it's based on the published full caliber fiscal, you could say budget, or the fiscal financial statement for the past 3 years. And so China's government book, this is consolidated both central government and local government. Now, but China carries, the government has 2 books. Actually, the government has 4 books, but it has the public book. So we have public revenue, public expenditure, and then we have government. So what the public category, the public revenue includes all the tax revenue, and then the government revenue has all the non-tax revenue. Just, without getting into the details, just for I'm trying to explain it in a very simple way. So for example, like lands concessions fall under the government revenue bucket, but they all roll up to the government's fiscal budget. So I show you the breakdown for the past 3 years. So total government revenue, for example, for 2022 was 28 trillion renminbi for the total revenue. That includes local and central government. That includes both tax and non-tax revenue. Right? So it's 28 trillion. It's the first yellow column that you see at the bottom of the line. What was the total expenditure for that year? Moving to the right, it's 37 trillion yuan. So for 2022, China CCP had 8.9 trillion yuan deficit, and that's 32% of its revenue. And this is serious. Anyone who has run a budget know that if you go over budget by 32%, you're in serious trouble. If you go over 5%, within 10%, it's manageable. But if you are consistently over 20% for the past 3 years, if you look at the percentage of the deficit for the past 3 years, for 2 years it's over 32%. For 1 year, it's over 20%. And this is the official number, right? These are all official numbers. So for the past 3 years, CCP has accumulated a 23 trillion fiscal deficit. And this amount is greater than the total fiscal deficit the regime has accumulated for the past 20 years before the pandemic. So I have a note that total fiscal deficit from 2000 to 2019 is 21.9 trillion yuan. So China accumulated more deficit in 3 years during the pandemic than the previous 20 years combined. So that's warning number 1, and this is not a small problem, right? So how did the CCP solve this? So how did the regime solve this problem? Well, by borrowing more money. So let's take a look at the debt. So this is, again, its official number. So first column is I just copied the deficit from the previous chart. Excuse me, 23 trillion. And then I show you the total government debt, the new debt, okay, not the accumulated amount or not the outstanding balance, but this is how much new debt CCP took out. And I broke it down between central government and local government by year. So it's about half and half. So the central government took out a little bit more than the local government. Essentially, it's about the same. So within 3 years, Beijing, together with its local government, borrowed an additional 44 trillion yuan debt, or borrowed an additional 44 trillion. So you may ask me, well, why? It only had a 23 trillion deficit, but why did it borrow more than what it needed, right? Why did it borrow 44 trillion when the accumulated deficit was only 23? What was the other 21 trillion for? That's a good question. This is because Beijing had to borrow more money to pay back old debt. It has this rolling debt schedule. So it has kept taking out new debt to pay back the old debt. So that's why the total amount of debt is greater than the deficit. So I have broken it down. So how much did China's debt grow in the past 3 years? So for example, the three green numbers were the outstanding government debt balance before the pandemic. So I broke it down between central government, local government, and consolidated. So that was 2019, right? By the end of 2019, before the pandemic, that's how much total government debt the CCP had. And the red number, the three red numbers, are the total debt the CCP had as of the end of 2022. And you see that it grew 62%. Is it 62? I can't say. Oh yeah, 62%. And then you see the breakdown. The local government debt grew more than the central government debt. So basically the calculation goes is you start the year, for example, the central government debt, you start with 2018 at 15.8 trillion, and then you add in the total new debt issuance. So, right, this number came from the previous slide. So central government issued during the 3 years this amount of new debt, but you need to back out the new debt to pay back the old debt. So that's the net is the incremental cost. So what that tells us, without getting to the details, is CCP's debt grew 62% over the 3 years. It was at 37 trillion before the pandemic. It is now at 60 trillion. As of 2022. It may be still growing now. And that's just very, very serious. But this is not everything, because we have not factored in, this is all on the book debt. We have not factored in the infamous local government financing vehicle, right? What do you call that? LGFVs. So I have, there's a Chinese analyst who did a calculation of the cost of zero COVID to China, and he showed this slide. He showed the breakdown of LGFV by year, and I translated for you. Basically, it says it shows the total new additional LGFV by year, and then he further break it down between how much of that is the new LGFV to pay the old debt, and how much is the new assurance, the new amount, right? The new LGFVs, the incremental ones. So I'll highlight. So for the past 3 years, the incremental LGFV is 5.4 trillion. Now, this is the number that he believes, and I agree with him, he believes is the money the CCP borrowed to pay for things like massive COVID testing, the construction and the maintenance of the quarantine hospitals. So all of those crazy zero COVID operations that required money we believe came from this bucket. That's what this incremental LGFV was for, because there was no infrastructure project during the last 3 years. They were issuing new LGFVs either to pay back old debt or to finance zero COVID. So that's, if we can have a ballpark number for zero COVID, that's the out-of-pocket cost of zero COVID for the past 3 years. Now, this, of course, does not include the loss of business, the loss of tax revenue, right? These numbers that we saw, these deficit, the 23 trillion deficit, are the lost to government revenues as a result of zero COVID. It's still a loss, but these losses do not reflect the out-of-pocket cost for zero COVID, but this 5.4 trillion, it reflects that. So here's a problem, because the LGFV are not backed by government. They're off the book borrowing, and they're sold by local merchant banks and local agricultural banks to tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of the most ordinary Chinese families. It's their life saving, it's their retirement money, right? It's their emergency money. So what would happen when local government cannot pay them back? Because the central government has already said that they're not going to help the local government with this problem, because they're just the amount is too large, and then every province has this problem. And recently in Guizhou, I talked about this in my April 15th video. Let me come back. I talked about this in my April 15th video when I talked about why Beijing is running out of money. I think it's April 15th. So in that video, I talked about how Guizhou government has publicly announced that it does not have the ability to pay back its LGFVs. And that government is what I call the political high ground for CCP politics, because a lot of the high-ranking officials, including Xi Jinping's loyalists, came from Guizhou. But such a politically important province is now publicly sending a message to defy central government's order to say, we don't have money to pay back these debt, we need help. It shows that the problem is very serious. So, and also last summer, one city in Guizhou province offered to extend, I shouldn't say offered, is offered a solution by the local banks. I mean, it's the local banks is controlled by the local government. So they're the same, right? It's the left hand helps the right hand. So the local bank offered the local government to extend the payment by another like 20 years. And the first 10 years, they don't have to pay principal. They only have to pay interest during the first 10 years. And they also lowered the interest rate. So this is like, if you bought their financial product, you're not going to get your money back until 10 years from now. And you are getting only interest payment, and then at a lower rate than you were previously promised. So it's just, when these things happen, then what will happen next is the local government will default, and then they will not be able to take out any more debts, right, to pay back the old debts. That means this entire platform will explode. So that's why China's LGFVs is already at a state where they cannot take out any more debt. They cannot borrow anymore from this platform. So that's why the CCP has run out of resources to pay for its zero COVID. It just it has too much debt. So let me show you the consolidated view. So if you add up everything, the national debt, the local government debt, the LGFVs, the hidden debt, it's 126 trillion RMB. And compared to China's official GDP, it's at 104%. You said, that number isn't bad, because the United States has a worse percentage. The United States is at 121%. We have a worse problem than China, right? So, so those of you who have joined me last week when I talked about China's real GDP, this is the thumbnail for that video. Know that I offered several different methodologies to calculate China's real GDP. The lowest is at 5.3 trillion dollar, not the 17 trillion, because sorry, what was the number? Here we go. Yeah, so 126 trillion renminbi is about 121 trillion renminbi is about $18 trillion. So if you convert the adjusted GDP that I had last week at $9 trillion, $8 trillion of $5.3 trillion based on the different assumptions, I convert them to to yuan here at 60 trillion, 60.9 trillion, 52 trillion, and 35.5 trillion. If you apply the real adjusted GDP that China has, then its debt to GDP ratio start to show a problem. So if the assumption that China's GDP is only at $5.3 trillion, which is 35 trillion renminbi, which is just slightly higher than Japan's GDP. We had that discussion last week. I'm not going to repeat that. You can watch that video after this. If that's true, if that assumption or that methodology is correct or nearly correct, then China's debt to GDP ratio will be at 356%. That's a really bad number. And I think in order to hide its debt problem, China has to keep growing its GDP. Now you see it's a mathematical problem for the CCP now. I called China's GDP a mathematical illusion last week. And I think now you see the reason why it has to maintain that mathematical illusion, because it needs to have a large denominator to reduce the debt to GDP ratio. Otherwise, its debt problem will be a crisis. So for all those reasons, I don't think China will lock down again because it cannot afford to economically. It also does not have the money to run the zero COVID operations again. So it would just let it ride. That's the conclusion that I have drawn. So, all right. So I think I answered two questions. One is China's outlook for a second wave of COVID, or is it here or is it coming? And the second question is how bad of a debt problem does the CCP have? All right, so a lot of numbers. Let me see if people have questions for me. All right, let me go through the super chat question from Mark K. Weeks ago, I told you I was learning Chinese. I started to notice a lot of Chinese language teachers on YouTube peddle 共产党 propaganda. One was even teaching how to sing 土红岗. I'm not quite sure what 土红岗 is. I know that there are a lot of mainland Chinese organizations or schools that are trying to offer English speakers Chinese lessons. And their curriculum, the CCP concepts, CCP propaganda are carefully implanted into the curriculum. So, for example, someone was telling me that a Westerner was taught how to say, I am Chinese. I am Chinese. And then I remember my subscriber was saying that he was upset to learn that. He does not want to say, I'm a Chinese, I'm American, I'm Australian, I'm Canadian. Why do I have to learn I'm Chinese? So for some people, they think it's harmless, right? But you will see, that's just one example. They'll keep telling you that you are a Chinese. You need to think like a Chinese. You need to work for the Chinese, and you need to think and talk like a Chinese. Like they will gradually through these curriculum by teaching you Chinese change how you think, and you will just blindly accept that, assuming that's just a cultural way of dealing with the Chinese. I've seen that in the curriculum. I have friends who teach Westerners Chinese who told me this. He said, if you look at the curriculum, it's just so obvious what the regime is trying to do. So I don't know if that's what you're asking, but I just want to give that tip. So I know Taiwan is also trying to expand its language learning programs outside Taiwan, and maybe you can, through your, I don't know if you have friends in Taiwan, find out if there are curriculums, uh, Chinese learning programs offered by the Taiwanese. They wouldn't have this problem. All right. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy. Let me see. All right. Let me see other questions from Chris Bell. Wow, Lei, you are making a huge impact. The CCP bots are coming in for full force now. The petty small people. Um well, I know I'm making an impact. Otherwise they wouldn't be here. I don't know who they are. I think there may be two categories of them. One is there may be three categories of them. One is they are Chinese living inside China who are paid to do this. If this is their only way to make some money, to make a living, I don't blame them. But they're just doing it to get a paycheck. I hope they use the opportunity to really get uncensored information, to really learn as much about what's going on in China as they can while they do the job. So I don't blame them. Now, the second category are people, Chinese people who based outside China, who are doing this. Uh, that's their choice. I feel very sad for them. They could do this. They could do other jobs. Why do they have to work for the CCP when they live in the free world? And it's just very pathetic. And then the third group I know are Westerners. There are Westerners who conscientiously using their status as a foreign or as a Westerner, right? As a Native Americans or Canadians. I know there are Canadians who do this, to trying to justify CCP's propaganda. And they take money, and the CCP has a huge budget allocated for them, and they're doing this. I think that's just very, very sad, and you should find something better to do. One day you will regret this. Same with the Chinese living outside China. If they can find any other job, I'm sure they can. If they speak English, I'm sure they can find other job. So whether they're Chinese or Westerners, they live outside China and they do this, I think one day they will regret it. Seriously, the day when CCP collapses, when CCP falls, they will be ashamed of themselves. I mean, I'm telling you, you will be ashamed of yourselves for doing this today. I don't mind, I don't mind, because your comments just says more about who you are than who I am. But you'll be ashamed of yourselves one day. And I hope you wake up to it. All right, I have from Van Catley, external debt is still low. Isn't the risk manageable? External debt. When you say external debt, what do you mean external debt? I'm not quite sure what you mean by external debt. All right, from Michael A. Mayo. Thanks for your analysis once again. I really appreciate the value of teaching me to think like a Chinese. I hope I'm not teaching you to think like a Chinese. Okay. I hope I'm teaching you to think like a real Chinese, the Chinese before the CCP, without the CCP influence. Okay, I think that's what you mean, right? Because I just talk about how the CCP trying to teach Westerners to think like a Chinese. Yeah, I hope I'm doing the right thing to help people understand the Chinese perspective, but that Chinese perspective is one independent of the CCP's influence. All right, so but thank you for your comment and donation. Let's see, Moonwalker. I keep seeing videos that Belt and Road countries that borrow from CCP can't pay back their loans, and it's bad for CCP. Yes. Oh, that question disappeared. But isn't this what CCP wants so it can take over their assets? Uh, okay, that's a very good question, right? People assume that the original design is the CCP would take over strategic assets from these countries like port, like natural resources like mines, right? So strategic natural resources or strategic infrastructure that the CCP want to take over in the event that these countries cannot pay the debt. However, now these debts are denominated in U.S. dollars. So when a large number of countries cannot pay their debt, it also causes the Chinese banks, the state banks, uh, a debt problem. So it's a. I mean, if China didn't go through zero COVID, I'm sure when it designed the program, it's assuming that its economy would do very well. That it did not expect zero COVID to hit the world like that. So it's assuming that export will be strong, domestic economy will be okay, like everything. If it's running as status quo, from the time they were designing the Belt and Road program, it would be fine. But now things has gone so bad economically for everyone in the world. So then debt problem could really hurt the regime. Hopefully I answered that question. It's a very complex question. Um, from Eve. Okay, here we have an 86 Lao Y. Okay, this is not the Lao Y 86. This is not the I think their name is Winston and Matt, the two Westerners who do programs on China. Who this is just somebody who's obviously is saying pro CCP stuff using their name, and I think it's not a very. Why don't you use your name? Um, uh, I don't mind, but I don't mind you saying this, but also I don't mind blocking you. So when you are saying things that's dishonest and not very helpful to a community, it's okay that I block you. Uh, I don't mind doing it either way. So, all right. So let's see. From Johnny Lay, are people dying from what? From COVID? That I have not seen any reports on that. I can't say people are dying from COVID, but the real fatality of COVID during the winter, the number has been covered up. Actually, didn't Wall Street Journal reported that the Chinese government has ordered the central government has ordered the local government to stop reporting um, a cremation number, the cremation statistics. They used to report those numbers, but they stopped reporting that. So that tells you something, right? Okay, so here we have a question. Does the anti-US CPC rhetoric trickle down to regular people if an American were to visit China? Um, there are always people in China who don't believe. There are a lot of people in China who don't believe the CCP's rhetorics, but they may not say so publicly. But there are always people who believe whatever the government tells them. So it's hard to say, right? So there are always people of each from each camp. Um, if you're American, um, if you have to visit China, I guess I can't stop you from going. But otherwise, it's not why. Why do you want to risk? Because it's I mean, the Sino-US relations are not going too well right now. And then, um, and sometimes when the CCP gets upset, and they can detain, um, foreign nationals for its own, as hostage. I mean, didn't we see that in the Meng Wanzhou case? Didn't we see that recently with the Japanese, somebody who worked for Japanese companies? So there are risks involved, and China has, big data, so they have collected a lot of information about people outside China. So they may know you more than you know yourself. So it's just very scary, what they would do if you have any value to them. So you may think, oh, I don't have any value, but your family members could be valuable to them. You don't know if they're in the industry of, making, maybe there are engineers involved in making turbine engines, or in the AI industry. Like, you don't know. I would just say in general, don't go. But if you absolutely have to go for business, or for whatever reason, then I can't stop you from going. Otherwise, just be very careful. That's my advice. All right, I have a question from Mating 11. Like, do you think the CCP gamble into EVs and batteries will pay off? No, I don't think so, because there's a lot of because of Tesla's price cuts. The other EV companies are forced, or were forced, to cut their prices. Not only EV makers, but also the gasoline, car makers are also cutting their prices. They're bleeding. The more cars they sell, the more money they lose. And also the battery maker, the Ningde, right? The number one battery maker in the world. I think that company is also, uh, the stock price has dropped. So, um, I think the I think it's I did a program that compared Tesla with China's number one EV maker, BYD. And I did all my analysis there to show that BYD, um, would not be able to compete with Tesla over the long run. You can take a look at that. But I don't think overall EV industry or battery industry in China would do well, because of uh, the the drastic reduction in population, and the drastic decline in domestic consumption. There are just not enough people to buy the EV cars, because people can't even find a job, or people cannot afford to pay their mortgage. So all of that is preventing the EV companies in China to do well. And also, part of the reason is it has been too aggressive in projecting their business opportunity. You know how China CCP has this, uh, great leap forward mentality about everything. If you all of a sudden people find out, well, EV is the direction that our government wants us to go, then everyone goes into EV. Even companies like Didi, right? Didi Chuxing, the Uber company, everyone had a, like a EV, company of some sort. Even Evergrande had an EV, franchise. So that's just that's just crazy. So, of course they're not going to do well. If the largest and the most successful on BYD is not able to compete with Tesla, over the long run, how do you think the other EVs can survive or the EV makers can survive? So that's just my justification. Um, Damon from Damon, um, Lei, if many countries default on Silk Road Initiative, you mean Belt and Road, do you think the IMF would get involved? Um, it better. Uh, I don't know. That would be a question to ask IMF. I can't answer that question. All right, let me see. Wow, a lot of questions. All right, so, oh, not addressed that to me. All right, I think I've answered. Okay, from Sumiland, Lei, thank you for blocking the rude distractors and calling them out. We know they lie, but our chat is more productive without them. Been rude and disruptive, please. Okay, I will. I will. Next time I'll try to have an assistant helping me do that. Um, all right. Okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. That's all for tonight. I think I've talked a lot. And thank you for joining me. And I'll see you sometime later this week. All right. Bye bye. Thank you. Bye bye.